Amos 1:2 says, "And he said, the Lord roars from Zion and utters his voice from Jerusalem. The pastures of the shepherds mourn, and the top of Carmel withers." So very clear, the Lord is doing that from Zion, not from everywhere. So how
Yes.
do we make sense of that? Isaiah 2:3, if I recall. "And many peoples shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem." And then 8:8, if I can type. "And it will sweep on into Judah. It will overflow and pass on, reaching even to the neck, and its outspread wings will fill the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel." Very obvious, and anyone who's read the Bible will know there are some special places that God is specially present. But even within those locations, as we no doubt can discuss, there are special locations within the locations. You think of, for example, the Holy of Holies, etc. There, God clearly is present in different ways, even though we shouldn't consider that as, how do we say, quantifications of God's presence.
Yes, yes, very, very well said, Camden. Let's try to amplify this with two basic categories taken from the biblical revelation. The first thing, and this is, our listeners are going to be very familiar with this, but it will help. The first thing that helps us understand what is being said here about the Lord roaring from Zion, about Emmanuel's presence extending out of that place and reaching out to who's in the immediate presence of God, is the theology of covenant. And Westminster Confession 7:1 and Voss, if you can think back this far, in pages 1 through 39, when he talks so much about the foundational character of God's approaching Adam in covenant, the point is that in addition to the natural religious fellowship that Adam had with God as the created image of God, covenant is a special act of condescension by which God makes himself uniquely, personally, and permanently Adam's blessedness and reward. Covenant is the means to the end of confirmed fellowship with God where he is not present. And this language, we may need to come back and fine tune this. Camden, you may want to fine tune it instantly. So I'll just throw it out there and then we can work on fine tuning it. It's not simply a generic presence, the way God's immensity is filling all space, cannot be contained by it because of the nature of God is infinite. But in addition to that, there's a special, after the fall, saving, covenantal, personal presence where, in the language of Psalm 25:14, the secret of God's friendship dwells with those who fear him, and he shows them his covenant. One of Voss's sermons speaks about that, where friend dwells with friend, life flows into life, and there's a special, intimate, reciprocal fellowship between God and his people that covenant enshrines. And
Mm-hmm.
and the location of that fellowship, whether you talk about Ezekiel 28 and Genesis 2, where Adam has fellowship on the mountain of God with God in a unique way, or I know Glenn Clary has talked about this with you. Abel brings his burnt offering to the gate of the mountain of the Lord, the mountain of Eden, and seeks to ascend the mountain through a burnt offering that an ascension offering that ascends up that mountain. Or you could talk about Noah and the burnt offering of Genesis 8:21 atop Mount Ararat. There, God dwells in the altar, receives that sacrifice as a sweet smelling aroma, and what happens? He's pleased with that sacrifice, and there's a special saving presence that anticipates the end of the age when God condescends in a unique way, is present in that altar and receives the sweet smelling sacrifice that Noah offers. That, of course, Ephesians 5:1 and 2 applies to Christ as a burnt offering who has poured himself out in death and then as a fragrant aroma to God on our behalf.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is that there are these special locations, these holy realms, often associated with mountains, earthly mountains, where God's covenantal presence dwells. And I think what Voss is wanting us to see is that we want to affirm both God's immensity and his unique, concentrated, personal covenantal presence. And and that comes into view, especially when the temple is built atop Mount Zion, which 2 Chronicles 3:1 says is Mount Moriah, bringing Genesis 22 into view. And so that God has a special redemptive dwelling place on earthly Mount Zion, which, if we could put it this way, houses his unique covenantal presence. And I think Voss is wanting us to see that immensity and holy theocratic dwelling belong together. The one doesn't erase or eclipse the other.
Right. I mean, we also, another important verse or chapter is Exodus chapter 3, where with the burning bush, where Moses comes and the Lord tells him to take off his sandals because it's holy ground. Well, why? If the Lord is omnipresent everywhere, why is that spot holy? One thing that's been helpful to me in my theological development, people may argue about how much progress I've had in my life about that development, but one mental construct or example for me that helps me understand what is at work here is the idea of sacrament. And one way to say, it's not the only way to speak of it, but we can speak of God's sacramental presence. How is the Lord present differently? If he's omnipresent, how is he differently present in Zion or on Mount Moriah in these ways, or in the temple versus outside of the gate, which is in the same geographical area? Well, he's sacramentally present to bless. And it's similar, analogous. How is the Lord present in the elements of the Lord's Supper, for example? Well, he's not corporally present. He's not present there in terms of transubstantiation or anything. But through this providence, through these ordinary means, the Lord is spiritually present and present to bless in a sacramental way. Similarly, God, I believe, can be sacramentally present in our time and space to bless in a particular way, and vice versa. I mean, he could be present in a wrathful way, whereas some geographic locations, particularly in the Old Testament, are places you don't want to be. In distinction from the places where you would want to be. So all of this is a helpful way, different categories, just another mental hook for our listeners perhaps to help them understand the difference.